All right, welcome DS12 to Thursday, Module 4, right? So what's important about today is this is the last lecture of the first sprint or the first week of class, right? Tomorrow we'll be doing things a little bit differently. So you want to be here right at 8 a.m. Pacific tomorrow because on the dot at 8 a.m. we will be sending out the sprint challenge, right? So what the sprint challenge is a is a notebook, right? An IPython notebook that's very much like your assignments, but it'll have 3 or 4 different sections. And in each of those sections, you'll be asked to do things that you were taught throughout the week, right? So can you load a data set? Can you make some basic scatter plots and histograms with the data set? Can you filter a data frame? Can you merge a couple of data sets together and then answer questions about the merged version of the data set? And you'll also be asked to make a small little graph similar to the one we're going to work on during class today and that you're going to work on during your assignment this afternoon. So we hope that the sprint challenges are very faithful to the things we've done during assignments throughout the week, and that there aren't any surprises on there. Just know that you'll have a 3-hour time limit from 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. To get that done and sent back in to your team lead. And then after that, we'll break for lunch at the usual time. And then coming back from lunch, we will have some more extended one-on-ones with your team leads, kind of reflecting on the week, a short Q&A session, hopefully, about the week, right? And then you'll have time in the afternoon where you're going to be able to get a head start on some of Monday's content, because Monday is a holiday. There will not be a lecture on Monday, so we'll be distributing a recorded version of Monday's lecture video to you. And actually there's actually quite a lot of lecture videos in Training Kit for Monday's content. So you might even watch more than one. If you think that your instructors talk slowly, you can put it on 2x speed on YouTube and you could watch 2 lectures and the normal time you would watch 1, right? So kind of the benefits of having things be recorded. But that's just to give everybody a day off on Monday. We're going to try and break Monday's material into end of day Friday and then Tuesday, right? So we'll consume the lecture on Friday and then need to have finished 2 assignments by end of day on Tuesday, right? So that's how we're going to try and still give everybody a vacation. We're going to kind of cram things in either direction and see if we can make it work. So be watching for that distributed lecture video tomorrow afternoon, and we'll talk more about this tomorrow as well. So just so you know what to expect, be here right at 8 a.m. tomorrow. There's no warm-up activity. We're going to start with the assessment right at the beginning of class. Also, that assessment will not be distributed to you via GitHub. What we're going to do is we're going to upload a link to an IPython notebook directly to the DS12 Slack channel. You'll need to download that notebook and then upload it to Google Colab to work on it. So this afternoon, we'll send out like a small little test version of that notebook so you can practice that workflow of downloading something from Slack and then uploading it manually to Google Colab. And then when the sprint challenge is over, you will need to work with it. There's 2 ways you could submit your sprint challenge. You could send the Colab link to your team lead, or you can download the whole .ipynb file and share that with your team lead as well. Talk with them to see what they prefer. And that's how we'll do things tomorrow. So it's gonna be a little bit different workflow for getting your files and then submitting your files. We're not gonna use GitHub because we don't want solutions to the sprint challenge to be out there in the wild where other people can find them. We wanna keep them private, all right? So without further ado, let me share my screen and I will share the lecture notebook with you. I already shared the Slido link. And oh, this is the GitHub version, so I need to save a copy in Drive. All right, I'm going to close this, rename this to DS12, so that you know that this pertains to your code specifically, time that we know this. And my Colab is having trouble. Come on, Google, you can do it. All right. So uh, up until this point in class, we have talked about data exploration, right? We did exploratory data analysis. We looked at some pandas functions we can use to load a data set and then learn things about that data set, right? Dot describe, a check for null values, value counts. We could filter data frames. We can make some simple graphs like histograms and scatter plots, all using the pandas library. Today's the first day that we're going to add one new library to this. We're going to add the matplotlib graphing library to what we've been doing today. And we're going to use pandas in conjunction with matplotlib. And what this is going to allow us to do is this is going to allow us to make what we call explanatory visualizations as opposed to exploratory visualizations. What do you think I mean when I say an explanatory visualization? How might that differ from an exploratory visualization? There's no right or wrong answers here. What does the word explanatory make you think? I mean, as well, it explains things. Joshua Price mentions, oh, maybe we'll have better labels. And Tony says, okay, for presentation purposes. John says maybe show correlation. Mountain says maybe for an external non-expert party, right? More detail, more concrete. Visualization you'll share with others. More so to make a point. Right. So exploratory is to learn about the data set, and explanatory is then to take what you've learned and communicate it as effectively as possible to other people, right? To explain the data set, right? So I love all of your answers, especially that your viewers or the consumers of these graphs might be non-experts, right? As Mountain mentioned, right? They might not know jack squat about data science, but we still need to use these visual cues in an effective way to communicate the major insights of our data to them while not being misleading, right? So we're going to talk a little bit at the beginning of lecture here about what are some of the biggest pitfalls that make for misleading visualizations, so that we can learn to avoid those pitfalls ourselves as we make our own graphs. And it's kind of just fun to see some really bad graphs. So go ahead and take a look at some of these. So there are a few different links here. There's all kinds of links that could be helpful to you here today. How to spot visualization lies is kind of the one we're going to look at, and also 5 ways writers use misleading graphs to manipulate you. And this first graph here, it looks like it's broken, but I believe it's actually not. Let's check this out. Yeah, there we go. So what happens is this website caches their images and doesn't allow them until someone tries to actually access that image. So now that I've gone to that image and I reload this cell, it will actually show up. Kind of a weird thing about how that site does their images, right? So the first way that I want to talk about that could be easily abused to make misleading graphs is having 2 different y-axes, right? So as you look at this top left graph, what do you think the author of this graph is trying to imply with this graph? By the way, the S&P 500 is the stock market, and the monetary base is the amount of money that has been printed, that is out in the wild. What do you think that author of this graph is trying to say, or trying to make us think? Okay, Tony says maybe that these 2 things are correlated. There's some relationship. Amin says how the S&P did against the monetary base from 2010 to 2016. John says, he wants us to say that the monetary base follows the S&P. Yeah, so maybe they're trying to imply some amount of causality here, that the printing of money is what's causing the stock market to go up. Or maybe the stock market going up is what's inducing the government to print more money. I don't know. Look at it either way. So yeah, we protect. Matt says that performance is stilted by inflation. Okay, that could be another thing. Depending on what you kind of draw a person's attention to, you could say, but things are leveling off here. Maybe that's a problem. I don't know, right? the thing that I want to point out here is where do these, where is this bottom corner of each of these y-axes? Where does it end? Or where should it end? Or where doesn't it end? I don't know, what's going on with these y-axes here that might be making this a little bit too good to be true. Okay, CJ's mentioned a good point too. So he says, well, we're only showing a few years. Jonathan says, well, it doesn't start at 0. Amin says, well, one's for the S&P, the other's for the monetary base, right? Like, so what's happened here is the author has manipulated these two graphs so that, like you guys mentioned, the y-axis here do not start at 0. And if we do this in a certain way, if we're willing to not start our y-axis at 0, and we're also changing the units here, so the S&P 500 is measured, in terms of thousands, but the monetary base is measured in terms of trillions, right? Two different scales with not starting at 0 basically makes it so that any two graphs that kind of go up and to the right, I can make them overlay each other with fancy enough cherry picking of timelines and fiddling with my axes, right? So these other three graphs show us what would happen if the different axes started at 0. So here's what the graph would look like if only the right axis started at 0. Here's what the graph would look like if the left axis started at 0. And here's what it would look like if the two things were put on the same, with the same units, right? There are also no units given for the S&P 500. Yeah, like stock market points. I don't know. So this is something that's really easy to do and maybe is not done intentionally, right? So on any place here today where we see something that seems misleading, we are going to, what's that famous phrase? I'm going to get it totally wrong, but we're going to assume incompetence before malice. What's that phrase? Anyway, we're going to assume the person just didn't know what they were doing, not that they were trying to make fake news or whatever. And you're going to see that later on, we're going to have some graphics from news organizations. I'm not trying to specifically pick on any specific news organizations. There are some graphs from both left-leaning news organizations as well as right-leaning news organizations here. Trying not to pick on any group in particular, right? But this is the easiest way to abuse line plots, is fiddling with y-axes. And when you have two different y-axes, it can be particularly misleading. All right, so be careful about this. You can use this appropriately. It's possible to, not all graphs that have two different y-axes are essentially misleading, but it makes it extra tempting. Christopher looked it up for us. He says, it's Hanlon's razor. Never attribute to malice that which can be adequately explained by stupidity. Right, and that's what we're going to do today. We're going to assume they just had never had this lecture before, and they liked making this graph. All right, so here's another one. This is an example of one y-axis, but the axis not starting at 0. All right, so what does this graph make you think if you are an untrained person and you don't look carefully at the y-axis? What do you think is going to happen to the tax rate if the tax cuts expire? Yeah, they're raising our taxes. It looks like they're like quintupling your taxes. Taxes are going up. They're going to be 5 times higher than they were before, right? Or yeah, or maybe 10 times higher, but like way higher. And then, if your y-axis actually starts at 0, it's like, oh, maybe that's a more modest increase. Now, maybe this increase is still unacceptable, right? But presented in very different lights in these two different graphs here, right? Here's another one. This is going to start a whole portion of lecture called "Pie Charts Are Usually Bad." So what's wrong with this graphic here? Yeah, they add up to 193%. That's bad. Yeah, too much pie. All right, so this leads us to, yeah, the source is opinions or Opinions Dynamic, which I assume is some polling company, right? But it looks like it says the source is opinions, which is kind of funny. I've read it that way in the past before too. Let me tell you a couple of other things I don't like about this graph, right? So the biggest principle with pie charts is that pie charts are meant to represent parts of a whole, right? Now, I don't know when exactly this graph was created, but I don't know if these are all of the Republican candidates, right? And also, this is not showing parts of a whole. There could be overlaps. There could be some people in this graph who back Romney who also back Palin, right? Like that has to be the case, or else this would, if that weren't the case, this would add to 100%, right? So this is a pretty bad and misleading pie chart. I'll tell you another nitpicky thing I don't like about this pie chart is that it's 3D. And not only is it 3D, but it's tilted backwards slightly, right? And as it's tilted backwards slightly, we see more of this front edge than we see of the back edge, right? So our eye sees a lot more green than it sees red, even though the Palin thing is 70% and the Romney is 60%, right? So like just the amount of ink or color we see in each of those different sections does not necessarily lead us, is not super reflective of the numbers, right? Even if those numbers were right. So I see that as a problem as well. Again, pie charts need to show parts of a whole, and this pie chart doesn't do that, right? So it's got issues. This section is called pie charts that omit parts of a whole are extra bad. All right. As you look at this graph, I'll have to zoom in here to make this a little bit bigger. What do you think is the story that's trying to be told with this graphic? Okay, yeah, so Amin's got it. This is the size of the pie is related to the market share of these companies. So the market share is the total value of all of the stock that's been issued for a given company. So it's roughly the value of a company, right? And this graphic wants you to say, whoa, these 5 tech companies, they are too big. They have monopolies. We need to break them up, all right? And this graph is of the S&P 500, right? How many companies are in the S&P 500? More or less. It's not exactly this number, but usually around 500, right? That's why it's called the S&P 500. How many slices of pie are in this graph? I'm just kidding. Don't count it. Right? Like a bunch. Now, CJ's on top. He says there are 287, right? And that's for a reason. This pie chart was shared by Michael Batnick, who has committed chart crime more than once in his life. All right. And here's what this graph is trying to say. It says the market cap of the top 5 S&P 500 companies is this. The market cap of the bottom 282 S&P 500 is nearly equivalent, right? So he has taken the top 5 and the bottom 282 and juxtaposed them against each other. He has omitted, what, 213 companies that are in between these two groups in size, right? He's omitted parts of the whole. He's omitted parts of this pie chart, right? So, wait for it. Silly Zoom toolbar coming up my tabs. All right. You go away. I thought I renamed this. Oh, I had to refresh the page. So I guess the renaming didn't take. All right. So the problem with misleading visualizations is that if they tell a story that people want to hear, particularly a story that journalists want to relay to the public, they get picked up all over the place, right? So this graphic went fairly viral, right? It's retweeted thousands of times on Twitter. Multiple articles were written about it. It made its rounds on the internet. Let me show you what this would look like. if it were done correctly. Blah, blah, blah. So here's what the graph would look like if you had not omitted the middle few companies, right? And as you look at this, you see, okay, these companies are still really big, first and foremost, but there's a kind of a cleaner gradient between big and small, right? And so you could probably still make the case that some of these companies are too big and have monopoly power and should be broken up. However, this graph I think is much more is less likely to be misleading, right? I don't want to say it's more honest, because what's really going on here is that this graphic requires people to look hard at the graph. It requires them to read the subcontext. But here's the number one thing that you can assume about graph lookers in your life, is that assume that they are very lazy and they are not going to take the time to read the text, check to see if the y-axis starts at 0, any of these things. They're going to look for the ink, they're going to look for the color, and they're going to try and see the conclusion. Wade says, I would attribute this to malice. I'll let you be your own judge. You can look at this whole Twitter thread here about people really calling him out. Poll, is this chart a crime? Is this a chart crime? 61% yes, 38% no. If this is wrong, I don't want to be right, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, he did later apologize for the graph. Says, yeah, I understand this pie chart was not the best. A pie chart was probably not the best choice to present this data, right? So after getting a lot of flack for it, I was thinking about it. But once it's been created, once it's out there on the internet, it takes way more effort to recall bad information or to erase falsehoods than it does to spread them in the first place, right? All right. So pie charts should show parts of a whole, and they should have all of the parts of the whole contained in them. You can't cherry pick which parts you want to retain, right? Because this needs to add up to 100. It needs to add up to 360 degrees, right? That's the assumption people have when using pie charts. Now this graphic is broken. I think it might be completely broken. I had lecture notes open that had, I found a working version of this graph. Give me 2 seconds. I forgot to update it in this notebook, so I apologize for that. Give me 30 seconds to find it. It's not working in my other notebook as well. Here's what this graph was supposed to look like. Not that one. All right. Americans who have tried marijuana, 51% today, 43% last year, 34% in 1997 of all years, right? So what's wrong with this pie chart besides everything? Does this pie chart show parts of a whole? Does it add up to 100%? I don't know if these slices represent the percentages here, right? Yeah, maybe it's trying to look like a peace symbol. I don't know. High support for legalizing marijuana. More than half of Americans say they've tried pot. All right, so these three data points shouldn't be a pie chart, exactly like Christopher says. They are not parts of a whole. They're three individual data points. These should probably be on a histogram or something like that. Yeah, we don't have any reporting of error bars. For example, margin of error here, plus or minus 4%. And apparently the margin of error was a source. I don't know, right? Like there's multiple bad things happening with this pie chart here. Anyway, so pie charts, it's hard to make them bad, but they're also not exceptionally good, good visualization types either, right? So, oh, I was going to show you a couple other fun pie charts. This is the most appropriate use of a pie chart I could think of. This is the pie I have eaten versus the pie I have not eaten, right? That's a good use of a pie chart. And pie charts for showing pyramids, those are pretty good. Anyway, so there's a lot of fun chart jokes out there. Anyway, keep showing pie. We got to move on. We talked about pie charts for probably way too long during this lecture day. I want to point out a chart that I think is better than pie charts, and these are donut charts. All right. I'm not going to show you any more pies, but I'll show you some donuts, right? So similar to pie charts, for whatever reason, I think it's easy for our human brains to compare arc length rather than like slice area. Does that make sense? Like, I think it's easier to tell the differences in slices here than with pie chart. I personally prefer donut charts slightly more, but that's just me. All right, so moving on from pie charts, be careful about how you use volume to represent quantities. All right, so here on the left-hand side is a graph that has been made incorrectly, and on the right side is the corrected design. What do you think went wrong with the graph on the left? Well, it's illegible at the bottom. That's partly my fault. It's just a little bit pixelated. There's a legend for no reason. I think they're saying where they got their sources from, and they actually got these things from all kinds of different sources. Total instead of percentage. The problem is it was made not by a Lambda student, Jacob says. Exactly. None of you would ever make this mistake. So here's what I think happened, is that on the left-hand graph, the size of these bubbles was generated either by using the radius of the bubble, or the radius of the bubble or the diameter of the bubble. I'm not sure which, but the comparison of the actual numbers of money raised should be a comparison of their radiuses. And what that has done is that, well, what's the equation for the area of a circle? Pi r squared, right? So you get the radius, and then you square that value, and it's made this look like it has this quadratic difference in volume, or area rather, between the big circle and the small circle. Whereas it's kind of a much more a linear drop off, right? So if you are using circles to represent an amount or a quantity, then you should use the area of that circle. The area should be equivalent to the quantity, not the radius of the circle should be equivalent to that quantity. Does that make sense? So this is a challenge for all kinds of graphs, right? Imagine we weren't using a circle. Imagine we were using a sphere to represent quantities. Now it's volume. Now it's 4/3 pi r cubed, right? And if you use radius, your data informs the radiuses of those spheres, right? Then you're going to have this cubic effect, right? This is going to be even more pronounced, right? So we have to be careful about, really, the question here is, what is the visual cue, right? And I think what happened here is this looks like a very custom graph type, like some infographic. I think this person made this in Photoshop, and they were just kind of like clicking and dragging out the circle until it covered a certain number of pixels, and then they stopped, right? We need to be careful about that the data point is informing the visual cue, right? Here, the data point is informing the radius, which is not the visual cue here. The visual cue is the area, right? But that's not, the area is not reflective of the data point. Does that make sense? that there's been there's been this extra middleman in between the two that is the equation for the area of a circle that is distorting the data points. All right, so a lot of this is thinking about what do the visual cues say to consumers. Right? Here's what I like. Make this a little bit smaller again. Don't cherry pick timelines or specific subsets of your data. What do you think this graph is trying to say about Arctic sea ice? What is this graph trying to say about Arctic sea ice? That it's not changing, maybe that it's melting, maybe that it peaks in March. The Y value is a specific range, trying to make it seem more severe. It's in decline. Maybe is this actual volume? Global warming is melting it. It doesn't seem to be melting. It's melting super fast in your printed. So, okay, so take a look at this. Take a look at the Y-axis. Millions of square kilometers of sea ice, right? So as this graph goes up, there's more sea ice, right? So what this graph is saying is that the sea ice has been recovering. That contrary to the typical global warming story that that every year we have less and less ice. Look at 2019. We've had more ice in February than we've ever had, and it looks like if you extrapolate this trend, we're gonna have so much sea ice in April, right? Like, but what I also want to point out is look at this legend here. What do you? Does this legend make you think there might be some funny business going on? I can't believe they didn't crop out the legend in order to tell the story they were trying to tell. Yeah, so we have cherry picked very specific years here to compare the sea ice against. Tons of years are missing. Okay, not only have specific years or each year representing a different line been cherry picked, but this date time has been cherry picked, right? So this is from, we're only seeing like roughly 3 months of time here, a little bit less than 3 months. What's cool is we can go to this same tool and see after the fact what has happened with sea ice, because it's not February of 2019 anymore, right? All right, so let's turn on 2019. And here's February 23rd. That's the little peak that we were looking at on the other graph. All right, and so what we could do is, let's try and make the other graph again. Oh no. Now I messed it up. Turn on 2019, turn off 2020. We'll zoom in. Okay. Wow, February surging compared to that year, compared to that year, compared to, oh, not that year. I'll leave that one off. And you know what I mean? All right, so this has been very carefully created. In fact, let me reset the zoom here and say show all years. All right, now let's find February again. There it is. In full context, maybe not as impressive of a recovery as the previous graph wanted it to appear, right? This is just normal random deviation in sea ice, right? Look how much some of these things are going up and down. All right. And where's 2020? Let's hide all years, turn on 2019 and 2020, reset the zoom. And we'll also turn on the median up until 2010. Turn on a bunch of these things, which would, if left on, would show us, okay, maybe there's a slight recovery in February, but we're still way below where we've been in the past, right? So I thought it was funny that this person worked so hard to try and tell a story that was contrary to the data. And they did it by extreme cherry picking of timelines and of what data they wanted to show. Why would they crop out the legend? You're assuming malice? I kind of am in this situation. Like this is pretty, I don't know, contradicting myself. We're all living contradiction. Anyway, so try not to cherry pick data. If you're showing something, show it in its full context, if possible. That will help people understand its true nature. Malice towards the environment. Yeah, maybe. All right. Here's a fun graph. We should use relative units rather than absolute units. All right. So here's a graph showing where certain sites users are. Here's a graph showing subscribers to Martha Stewart Living, and here's a graph showing consumers of furry pornography. And the person's giving the presentation says, the business implications are clear, right? Why do you think these three graphs look so similar? And is it true that these websites' users are subscribers to Martha Stewart Living who are also consumers of furry pornography? Good. So if you scroll down a little bit, it says pet peeve number 208, geographic profile maps, which are basically just population maps, right? So what has happened here is this person has grabbed the website users and plotted where the most website users are. And lo and behold, we have more website users in big cities where there's more people in general. And lo and behold, there's more subscribers to Martha Stewart Living where there's also more people in general. And there's also more consumers of furry pornography where there's more people in general, right? So what needs to happen here is this, we call this using an absolute unit. They've just plotted the raw counts of specific individuals in different areas. They need to use what we call a per capita measure. So how do you get a per capita measure? Well, you pick a specific region, you count up the number of people who fit your definition in that region, and then you divide it by the total number of population in that region, right? No malice intended towards furry pornography. It's just a fun juxtaposition of these three things in these three graphs. So if a per capita measure was used, right, then we would see the number of site users per 100,000 people living in an area, the number of Martha Stewart users living per 100,000 people, number of consumers of furry pornography per 100,000 people. And these graphs would look very, very different. So this is something I want to stress this as much as I can, all right, that this is a mistake that I see at least one person make, one of you make, during Unit 1. So during the last week of Unit 1, we're going to work on a data storytelling project where you're each going to pick a data set that you want to use, and you're going to try and make explanatory visualizations. You're going to use pandas to find the insights in the data, then make graphs that communicate those insights. And every unit without fail, I see someone make this mistake where they're basically just making a population map. Right now, it can be useful to include a population map as well, as long as you include both. You need a relative unit measure per 100,000 or per the population, as well as the absolute unit as well. Otherwise, you're just making a population map. All right. So be wary of that. And is this the last one? Oh, two more. All right. Next one is avoid 3D graphs unless having the extra dimension is particularly effective, right? 3D graphs for the sake of just having something that's 3D and kind of cool, it's not two-dimensional, is not a good enough reason to have a 3D graph. All right. So, by the way, this is fake data. Tom, Dick, Harry, John, North, South, East, West. This is kind of meaningless, and I don't know what the height value here is. But can anyone, just by looking at this graph, know what tool was used to make this graph? Yeah. This was made with Microsoft Excel, right? And Microsoft Excel has some terrifically bad 3D graphs, or at least allows you to make bad 3D graphs if you're not careful, right? So some of the problems here is that, yet again, this is a 3D graph, but it's been tilted, right? And so this makes it appear that the purple bars are a little bit higher than they really are. Bars in the back have been elevated a little bit more than bars in the front. That's problematic. Also, bars in the front are covering up bars in the back. You can barely see this little green bar right here. Now, what would maybe make this graph okay is if I could rotate this graph and choose the angle from which I wanted to see it, give my eyes a little bit more depth perception by rotating and manipulating this graph. But having a 3D graph for a 3D graph's sake is not useful. This would be much better as like a paired bar chart or even a stacked bar chart. There's lots of better ways that this data could be presented. So we're going to eventually work with some 3D graphs. There's some really cool 3D graph plotting libraries like Plotly and Bokeh. All right, and we'll get to those over time. But just be a little bit careful that 3D graphs we're trying to make the communicating of the data as effective as possible. We're not just trying to use a fancy graph for using a fancy graph's sake. Yeah, Harry East. I don't know, like you'll see. So there's five bars here, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But we can only barely see 4 green bars. So there must be a 5th green bar over here somewhere, right? Completely losing a data point. Anyway, so avoid 3D graphs unless you have a reason, a real strong motivation for using a 3D graph. And if possible, use a 3D graph that is interactive. You can rotate it, move it around. All right. Last one says, don't go against typical conventions, right? So what is this graph saying at first glance? Okay. So at first glance, now this is a typical line plot. I go and I look at it, I go, okay, there are a lot of gun deaths, but then Florida enacted its stand your ground law, and gun deaths plummeted. Whoa, that's crazy. Florida passed this law and had a big effect, right? But they have gone against the typical convention, as some of you have noticed. The y-axis is inverted, where we have 0 at the top, and it increases as we go down. So this really means that gun deaths increased heavily after that law was passed, right? The opposite of what you might think. And remember, lazy viewers will not take the time to look at your axis. Hopefully you guys will, because I mean, you'll be trained in this, but not everyone has been trained in making graphs and looking at graphs and viewing them in this way, right? So here's a question I have for you. Why do you think this person chose to invert their y-axis? Why did they go against this typical graphing convention? Any ideas what they were trying to do? Malice, misrepresent the data? Visual shock? What kind of visual shock, Wade? Antonio says the blood effect. Yeah, and Jesus says maybe to simulate blood. Yeah, I think that's what they were going for. I think this person was trying to be artistic and wanted this to look like blood dripping down a wall. And that was their kind of their artistic motivation in going against this graphing convention. Here's why I think that is the case. They saw this graph and they thought it was cool and they wanted to make their own. All right, so this is a graph of deaths in the Iraq War. All right. The dark red up here is coalition deaths, and then the rest of the red is civilian deaths, right? And I think that this graph is much more effective at looking like blood dripping down a wall than the other one, right? But still, you don't catch it unless you look at the inverted axis, right? And of all these other graphs, I give extra, extra context as well. Right. Cedro has mentioned one reason why this graph is more effective, that this is a bar chart, whereas, come on, zoom. Whereas this is a line chart, right? So this looks a lot more maybe like actual drips of blood. Jesus makes a very good point. Does it depend on the title also? Absolutely. Absolutely. This title has been made giant at the top for a reason, right? Because they're trying to help you see immediately what they're trying to show with the graph, right? And so I think some of this nuance and why this graph was effective was lost on the person making the Florida version, right? And Bo makes a very good point, a point I was going to make as well. He says, I like it better when the title says the conclusion and not just a label. I 1,000% agree. I hope to not see graphs from you guys where you make a scatter plot that says that the title of the plot should not be scatter plot of X on Y, right? Everyone knows that a scatter plot is X on Y. Use the title of the graph to tell the reader what you want them to see in the graph. Tell them what the takeaway is, so that they're going to read the title first, then their eyes will move down. They'll know what you want them to look for, right? I want to point out another graph here. Where is it? I can't remember what I need to Google to get this graph to pop up. So here's the Florida one, and some people said, "Hey, I fixed that for you," right? And they flipped it back right side up. I'm trying to find the fixed it for you version of the Iraq War graph. Can't get it to pop up in the Google image search. Basically, someone had taken the same graph, flipped it back, quote unquote, right side up, turned the color to blue, and said something like peace has increased in Iraq, or something else. Oh, you saw it? Where? Oh, here it is. Thank you. Oh, no. All right. Iraq, deaths on the decline, right? Same data, different story, or pointing out a different thing, right? This is something that I think is can't necessarily be avoided, right? And what I mean is that if you approach data with the intent to tell a certain story, you'll probably be able to find a way to tell that story, right? What I would hope you would do as a data scientist is strive to be objective and strive to fit your model to the data and not your data to the model, right? Have no preconceived notions going in. Lawrence makes a good point. In a way, both are kind of true. Absolutely. Absolutely. So we have a great responsibility, right? With great power comes great responsibility, Spider-Man, right? That we get to choose how to represent the data, what visual cues to use. There's only been 3 things changed between these 2 graphs: the color, the axes flipping, and the title. There's only 3 things that are different, yet these graphs say wildly different things. You notice all these other graphs are still upside down, right? isn't having a conclusion-based title leading the witness in that way? It depends on if you have represented the data in its appropriate context, right? If you've cherry-picked something, then, for example, right, right. If there was a title here that said, sea ice has really grown, but the data has not been presented in kind of an objective context, that I think it's much more nefarious. But many times you just want to help your reader know what to look for, right? So I think there's a fine line here, as there is in all ethics, right? Between trying to make your graph more consumable versus trying to represent something out of context, right? So if you come and look at this graph here, strong Arctic sea ice growth this year, right? Among other things. Anyway, an interesting website in general. Yeah. So be careful. Be careful. It is a good idea to have your graphs and your work be peer reviewed. This is one of the biggest reasons for peer review in academic settings, is to try and avoid these pitfalls, trying to avoid accidentally misleading people, because a lot of times academics, or anyone using graphs or trying to tell stories in this way, have been working in a field for a long time. They're working on a topic they're passionate about. They probably have some personal opinions about things, and trying to be as objective as possible, allow these things not to creep into your work, to fit your model and your view of the world to the data, and not try and fit the data to your view of the world, is something we can all strive for, and trying to use these visual cues appropriately. All right, so last thing I'll share before we take a quick break is this link here. This is one of my favorite little, I guess, infographics, you could say. Come on, Zoom. All right. This is the chart doctor. I want to zoom in here a little bit. But this shows a whole bunch of different charts, and some charts that have visual cues that are more effective for showing different things than others, right? So we have showing deviation, correlation, ranking, distribution, change over time, magnitude, parts to whole, spatial representation, flow, right? And lots of cool graph types that you may not have considered, right? So up to this point, what I like also about this page is that kind of the most common versions of these graphs are towards the top, and they get kind of wonkier as you go down, right? So we've used ordered bar charts, we've used scatter plots, we haven't used a diverging bar chart yet. We've used histograms, we've used line charts, we've used column charts, right? We haven't used a choropleth yet, but those are pretty cool. And then as you go down, the types of graphs that are available get more and more custom, right? And so not only today, but as we're working into the future, practicing our graphing, I hope that you would maybe use this graphic to get ideas for different ways you could represent things. But just to realize that different graphs have different strengths and weaknesses. There's all these pros and cons and trade-offs in the decisions that we choose, right? We've even got pie charts and donut charts, right? And that maybe you will have a data set where you really want to show distribution, and you'll come and try a violin plot, see how that works, or try a box plot and see how that works. And over time, become more and more familiar with lots of different chart types that will help you be more effective in telling stories and explaining data insights as a data scientist. Oh, I think someone shared this just before me. Maybe. I don't know. All right. So a pretty cool graphic, a really useful one. Take a look at it to learn about some chart types you maybe didn't know existed before. For example, one of the coolest ones, these Sankey charts, I think those are really cool. I think they're kind of, maybe they're trendy right now, but anyway, charts you maybe have not worked with or made in the past. So today on your assignment, and in the next half of lecture, we're going to try and mimic some chart types of some people who are really good at making charts. we're going to look at the charts made by the website 538. Yet again, 538 is a website that deals with political topics as well as sports and other things like that. Us mimicking their charting abilities says nothing about Nate Silver, the CEO's political views, right? But what we're going to do is we're going to try and learn from their graphing abilities, right? And as we do this, we're going to pick a chart for the second half of class, and I'm going to teach you some basics of Matplotlib. We're going to try and recreate that chart as pixel perfectly as we can, given the time that we have. I'll maybe get it 60% of the way there, right? And then during the first part of your assignment, I want to take the graph that we've worked on during lecture and try and make it even more pixel perfect. Try and make it as close as you can to the original graphic. And then once you've taken that as far as you like, you feel like you've gotten as much meaning out of that exercise as you need, then I want you to go to 538 and to pick a second chart to try and recreate all on your own, right? So each of you is going to end up trying to recreate a different chart that you choose during the afternoon. However, what I suggest is that for today, as we're just getting started with Matplotlib, that you try and find a chart on 538 to recreate that is similar to the chart types that were, I closed it, that we're a little bit more familiar with. So choose a chart that's closer to like a bar chart or a histogram or a line plot or a scatter plot as your first chart. The first chart that you'll be doing all on your own. And then as the stretch goal on the assignment, go ham, go wild, challenge yourself. Try and do a choropleth map. Try and do a Sankey chart. Try and do something a little bit crazier as the stretch goal for today. But we're just going to practice building charts with Matplotlib by trying to mimic other good charts and see if we can recreate what they've done. So we'll take a more look at that when we get back from a 5-minute break. So I'll see you back here in 5 minutes. All right, come on back. We'll get going once again. And let me take a look at Slido. I have totally spaced looking at Slido today. I apologize for that. Does it usually take people the whole 3 hours to complete the sprint? Uh, it depends. Um, I think we've tried to write the sprint challenge so that, like, if an instructor was doing it, they could do it in 30 to 45 minutes, right? Um, it should be doable within the 3 hours if you feel more or less okay about the assignments that have happened during the week. However, for certain individuals, you might not completely finish in that time. If there's some like extenuating circumstance that comes up during the sprint challenge, like your internet goes out or some wild thing, or you just get stuck on one small portion of the sprint challenge that makes it so that you can't complete later portions or something silly like that, you can work with your TL. They may slightly extend your deadline or even schedule a time where you could retake the sprint challenge if something really catastrophic happens, right? You should all be able to finish within 3 hours. So don't don't kill yourself, right? So the point of the sprint challenge is there's many different purposes for it. First off, we're trying to just assess your level of mastery of the last week of content, see where you're at. It's kind of a barometer for how you're doing. But secondly is the time deadline is very important. Is a very important function of it, right? So later on, when you get into the job search, you'll probably get lots of take-home coding challenges from companies that will be timed, right? So working with a time deadline, working under pressure, and doing a code exercise that you haven't done before, this is also us trying to prepare you for interviews and for the interview process later on, right? So the fact that we're doing sprint challenges, like, well, first priority is using it as an assessment tool. Second priority, we're learning how to do these kinds of exercises to prepare uh, for interviews later on, right? So it is, we're not just trying to punish you. We're not just trying to have a test. There's lots of good motivations for having the sprint challenge, but you should be able to complete it in 3 hours. If not, then we need to take a look at the topics of this last week and figure out how can we help you have a higher level of comfort with those topics or with the code syntax. Now, sprint challenges are open note, open internet, everything except for open human, right? So you can't talk to other people about things on sprint challenge, but you can look at your past assignments, you can look at lecture notes, you can Google things, right? You just can't talk with living humans about it. You can see things written by dead humans, or you can get help from your ancestors, right? But you can't talk to other people in the class about it. Is N.N. Taleb required reading in this profession? He's very, very popular. Some of his stuff is very on point, and we'll talk a little bit about him during Unit 1. Some things about how anyway, not necessarily, but many people are familiar with him. I think he's kind of a jerk on Twitter, but that's kind of what he loves, is just being very what's the word? Uh, not diplomatic, right? Getting into lots of Twitter fights and blocking people and being kind of problematic. But his statistics knowledge is on point. When he gets outside of that, buyer beware. For the assignment, we need to replicate the lesson and do this with code, because the first part of the lecture, we just analyze visualizations. Yeah, so when we say replicate the lesson content, it'll only be the second half of the lecture. And you're going to need the code that I write during lecture in order to do the first part of the assignment anyway. So for today, no matter what, you're going to have to, at some point, type out the things that I do during lecture, because you're going to need to build upon what we do during lecture for the first part of the assignment. In real world challenges, would we be able to Google things? Yes, typically. So there's two different kinds of challenges. There's those take-home challenges. Those are typically open internet. And then there's like whiteboarding challenges where you're in the interview with a hiring manager, somebody. Sometimes in those instances, they don't allow you to Google things. So it kind of just depends. For the time to take home challenge type things, they're almost always open internet, open book, open mentors. If you have them, you can use any resources you want. Typically, they might put some restrictions on that for doing those. So we're trying to mimic that with the sprint challenge as well. So uh, uh, channel set. Oh yeah, and Intelab has a lot of hot takes. That is absolutely true. That's absolutely true. And I wanted to point out that you guys had made some really awesome comments towards the end of our discussion about visualizations that I have not acknowledged. So just thank you for that. All right, so let's keep going. And we are going to talk now specifically about the visualization tool we're going to get acquainted with today. We won't be pros by the end of the day, but I feel like you'll feel like you have the powers to customize your graphs a whole lot more than you would just making a quick graph with pandas by the end of the day. And that's our intent. Our intent is not to know everything about this library in the next 50 minutes, but to get a good start with some of the most basic and most important things about it, right? So we are going to look at matplotlib. And in order to do that, we need to understand that when graphs are made with matplotlib, they are broken down into different sections. It's kind of like different layers of things piled on top of one another, right? So we have this outer section here, kind of this light gray section. That is usually called the figure of the graph. It's kind of the background that the graph sits on top of, all right? Very important. And then inside of the figure is the actual square where the graph lives, or rectangle. And that is typically called the axes with an E. So we have our y-axis and our x-axis, but then together they make up the axes, which is the box that the graph lives in, right? Sometimes these axes are also called subplots. They're sometimes called subplots if there's more than one of them. Right, we'll break up this figure into multiple subplots, but if there's just one, we usually refer to it as the axes. All right, and then the thing that actually gets painted on the graph, these sine waves or cosine waves or whatever they are, we call those the plot itself. Right, so we plot the data on the axes, which sits on top of the figure. Right, now understanding this layout is very important because as we work with matplotlib, there will be different variables where we can change different things. For example, if I want to change this color out here, the lowest layer of background color, I cannot do that by accessing the axes variable. I can only do that on the figure variable, right? So knowing where to do things and knowing where the different methods live that we want to use requires us to understand this this structure, this breakdown. All right. Another thing I want to point out. By the way, you do not need to type out this. You do not need to type out this code as part of your reproduction of lecture. That's why it's already here in the lecture notebook. All that this code is doing, this is all matplotlib code. It's a lot of matplotlib code. It's making this really complicated graph, and that's why there's so many lines of it. But what this graph is doing is it's just showing us more terminology associated with matplotlib graphs. So like we have the title, the legend. We have the grid or the grid lines, right? So we have a line plot, a scatter plot, and a line plot. Those are the plot elements that are on this graph. We have a major tick, which is kind of these bigger ticks here. These are all major ticks. And then we have minor ticks, which are a lot of these smaller ones, right? We have our y-axis label, our x-axis label. We have major tick labels, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And we also have minor tick labels, which are these 0.25, 0.5, 0.75 minor tick labels, right? So lots of things going on here. What else have I missed? Oh, we have the figure, which is this outside section. That's why this circle's all the way on the outside. The figure goes all the way around the outside of the graph. And then the outer edge of the axes are called the spines, all right? So this terminology is important because this terminology is going to be used in our code. Right? If I want to change the spines, I'll do something like AX to access the axes, AX dot spines, right? And then call some function. Or I'll do AX dot legend or AX dot grid or AX dot plot or AX dot tick label, right? Or set tick label or other things like that, right? So this terminology, I present it first and foremost because it'll show up in our code, right? So that's mainly the reason why this graphic is here. You do not need to type out this code for your graphic. Jacob says outer edge like border. Yeah, exactly. This most outermost edge or the border of the graph is the spines. spines. Can't talk today. All right. But one thing that could be kind of cool about this graph is this graph is using the syntax that we want to use today. I'll talk about what that means in a minute. There's a couple of different syntaxes you can use when working with Matplotlib. I want you to start off with one specific syntax today. So you can, as you're trying to figure out, how does Matplotlib work? One fun technique would be to find code of other people that's working and break it, right? So for example, what is controlling this blue line among all these lines of code? Well, I can come up and try and find something that I think is relevant to that blue line. It's probably going to call .plot. It's probably maybe going to have the color blue in it. Okay, blue signal, ax.plot. Comment that out. Now rerun the code. Okay, the blue line's gone, right? Now I know for sure that that blue line was being created by this specific line of code, right? And so that could be a fun way to get more acquainted with Matplotlib, to learn how things work by breaking them on purpose, right? That's a fun technique, right? But I'm not going to spend any more time on this graphic besides just the terminology aspect of it. I'll leave it for your exploration later on. All right, so here's what we're actually going to do. We're going to try and mimic this graphic as closely as possible. I want you to notice the title here. The title is not Ratings for the Movie An Inconvenient Sequel, Truth to Power. That's not the title. The title is An Inconvenient Sequel, Truth to Power is Divisive. It's telling you what it wants you to see right off the bat. So we have a title, we have a subtitle, then we have a bar chart, a histogram. We have bold x-axis and y-axis labels. We've got this orange color for our bars. We've got grid lines. We've got major tick labels. We have this horizontal line at the bottom with the 538 logo and source IMDb, right? So there's a lot going on here. We're going to learn how to control all these aspects of our graph today, right? We're going to do it by trying to mimic this same graph. So you can check out the here's the actual post this comes from. Here's the graph, right? If you're curious. But for getting started, I want your focus today to be as much as possible on working with the graphing and not working with wrangling the data, right? I want you to spend your time learning how to graph. So what we're going to do is we're going to make some fake data, right? I've just picked some numbers here and put it in a pandas series. So that's a column of a data frame. And then I'm plotting that data here, right? And I've said use color 1, etc. I've set this plot style, which I maybe shouldn't have done. Right. I'm fake data. We're all fake data. What is life? All right. So we've picked these values because they more or less represent the heights of the bars here, but they're not exact. All right. They're not exact. They're in the ballpark. And you'll notice that this is what I get out of the box with the bar plot. Right. It gives me bars, but still a ways away from the 538 version, right? So I would call this an exploratory plot. Actually, an exploratory plot would be something like this. All right, here's an exploratory plot. I'm just trying to see things, right? And as I go and try and make this have a specific style, have a specific quality to it, I'm making it explanatory. Something I would be proud to show my boss, right? Or an investor, some stakeholder, right? In my project. So the first thing that I want to talk about here is, well, actually, I want to come back to this. I want to talk about the syntax that I want you to use today first, and then we're going to come back and we're going to go back to this 538 graph. All right. So I'm going to add a little section here called use matplotlib pyplot syntax. All right. So when I'm working with Matplotlib, there's two different ways generally that I can create graphs. The first way is very, very similar to the way that we've been using when we worked with pandas to create graphs. And the reason why it's so similar is because pandas uses Matplotlib to make its graphs, right? Pandas under the hood was accessing Matplotlib to generate its graphs. And so you'll be somewhat familiar with the syntax. It's going to be a little bit different. But in order to do it, I need to import a specific portion of matplotlib called pyplot, right? So I'm going to say, man, my throat's getting destroyed. Now import matplotlib.pyplot as PLT. This is typically what it is aliased as. All right, that's how I'll import it. And then I'm going to say, make some data. I'll call this data. And 636254, right? Like silly values. I should actually maybe make this as a data frame. You know, I don't need to, right? So now I'm going to use the PLT object that I imported to make my plot. All right. So plt.plot, and then I'll just pass in my data. Okay. And here's my plot. Notice I get the same funky output that I would get if I used pandas plotting, right? And I can still squelch that using the semicolon. However, what would be probably better is if I did plt.show. Notice how I mentioned the other day, plt.show tells pandas that my graph is done, right? And to display it, right? Same thing here. This is where this really comes from, is pyplot, right? Now, the thing to know here is that with pandas, instead of calling this on plt.plot, this would be like df.plot, right? And call it on my data frame instead of the pyplot specific object. That's basically the way that this differs. But I can maybe make some more data. Right? And have a second plot here. If I call plt.show in between these two plots, well, then it says, hey, well, I'm done with the first plot. So this second data, it should go on a new subplot or a new axis, right? If I take this plt.show out, I'll just comment it out. Matplotlib goes, oh, he must want these on the same graph because he hasn't called plt.show in between, puts them on the same graph.
When you know, you know.
I accidentally activated Siri. All right, so this is something very, very similar to what I demonstrated. I think it was yesterday, if not it was yesterday, the day before that with pandas, right? So this is the matplotlib pyplot syntax. Everything happens on this PLT object. So I can say plt.title, my title, plt.xlabel, number of things, plt.ylabel, frequency, I don't know, right? And get all of these different things happening. Notice I called these methods on the PLT object, and these method titles, where do they come from? Well, my anatomy, right? So my title, my X label, my Y label, etc. All right. So this is pyplot syntax, right? So in my opinion, pyplot syntax is the best or is the most useful for exploratory, i.e. quick and dirty graphs, all right? It's a little bit harder. Make a really custom graph with pyplot syntax, right? So today, do not use pyplot syntax. Right? For today, I don't want you to use plt.this, plt.that, plt.the other. All right, so I'm going to show you a different syntax that works with matplotlib. So one of the hardest things about matplotlib is that it is not a very Pythonic library. All right, so what I mean when I say Pythonic is that there's typically one clear way of doing things. Matplotlib is absolutely not that way. There's usually like 8 ways of doing things with matplotlib. And so in order to try and reduce the complexity of what we're working on today, I'm trying to say, okay, forget about all the ways of doing things with the pyplot syntax today. Just focus on this more narrow subset. Another reason, sorry. So you might be asking, well, Ryan, why do you even introduce the pyplot syntax to us? because you're going to go out and you're going to look at tutorials, you're going to Google things, and you're going to see examples of people using pyplot syntax. And I want you to know, if you run across those resources, that those are not useful for you today. I want you to ignore them. And the reason for that is the methods that we will call, .title, .xLabel, .ylabel, those will be different based on the version of matplotlib we're using. If we're using pyplot syntax versus the version I'm about to show you, which we call figure axes syntax, right? It allows us to access our figure and our axes separately, but all the methods have been renamed also. They're different, all right? And so it'll be less confusing if you just focus on one or the other. Okay, so back to 538 here. I'll have to restart my runtime to turn off this 538 style. I want to point out that matplotlib has all these style sheets that can be very useful, right? And you can load these style sheets before you even start, and it will and then each of these style sheets has a certain color palette that is associated with it. And that's shown here by these different lines and the different colors of these histograms here, right? So they have a set of colors, and they get named color 1, color 2, color 3, color 4, color 5, I think up to color 6, and then they start over again, right? So if I say color equals C1, then it's going to set this to color 1. If I say C2, then it's color 2. C3, then it's color 3. C4, color 4. C5, color 5. And C6, back to the blue. C7, and we start over again. All right, so since we want orange, we're going to start off with color 1. And then we're going to start with this. This is our starting place. We're going to take this as far as we can during lecture to make this look like the 538 example. And anything I don't get to, I'm going to challenge you to do as part of your assignment. All right. So here we go. Here's some other fake data. This is probably a lot closer to how it's actually being generated from the 538 data set, where we have a whole bunch of different reviews that are 1s versus 2s, 3s, 4s, a whole bunch of different reviews that are 10s. And we're counting all of those up with a value counts before they get plotted. It's basically the same thing. This is probably a little bit closer to what's happening with the 538 data, but we're still just going to work with fake data here, all right, for starters. Now, let me show you a little bit about the figure axes syntax, all right? This is how it's going to differ from pyplot. With the figure axes syntax, we're going to create 2 variables before we start, every single time. So I'm going to create a figure variable and an axes variable. And this is typically what they're called. So you'll see them abbreviated this way. It's a very strong convention. A lot of people do it this way. You can call these whatever you want. You can spell them out if you want. But just know that this is probably what you'll see in a lot of documentation or other tutorials out there, right? And then I'm going to call plt.subplots. What this is going to do is it's going to generate me a blank figure and axes section of a graph. Okay, so that's what I've got. I've got a blank figure and a blank axes. Right? Now, what I want to do is, if I want to change the background color of the very outermost section, well, I'm going to do that on the figure. All right. And if I want to set the background color of the middle section of the axes, I'm going to do that on the axes. Okay. And if I want to actually plot something, I want that to go in the middle, so I want that to be on the axes as well. Whoop, got to spell your 2-letter variable right. Right, so this is how I'm going to control what's going on. So this is going to give me a little bit um, more control of my graph by using the figure axis syntax as opposed to the pie plot syntax, right? So notice I'm not calling things on PLT objects. I'm calling them specifically on the figure and the axes object. Now, another big difference between the pie plot syntax and the figure axis syntax is we get a lot of, we use a lot of methods that are called dot set, right? So if I wanted to change my X label here, for example, I would do something like ax.set X label. And this is my X label. All right. So with the pie plot syntax, it would have just been dot X label. With the figure axis syntax, it's set X label, right? So if you are using pie plot syntax to give you hints about how to do your assignment or looking things up, and you come here and you try and do something like you would want to do with pie plot syntax, it's going to throw an error, right? So I'm trying to help you keep the two differentiated to know that they have different method calls. All right. What is dot patch? I'll let you look that up a little bit later, and maybe I'll even speak to that here in a minute. But the way that the matplotlib library is organized is a little bit complicated. So for now, just know I'm just demonstrating the figure axis syntax here. We'll get into a little bit more what patch is a little bit later. So allow me to defer that question. All right, so what is going on here? All right, so annotate with text. Let's take our 538 graph and let's try and really get it to be working the way that we want. So I'm going to say, first I'm going to set the style sheet. All right, so I'm going to say plt.style.use 538. Right, so I am doing this on the PLT object. This just means for all of matplotlib, set this style sheet. But after that, I'm going to make my figure and axes. Okay, and we're ready to get started, right? So first thing, I want to put the data on that graph, right? Should I do that on the figure or should I do that on the axes? I want to put the bars on. Should I do this on the figure or on the axes? What do you think? Good. I see a lot of people saying axes. That's right, because we want it to be in the middle. We want it to be in that middle square, right? So I'm going to say ax dot plot. And what kind of a plot do I want this to be? I want this to be a bar plot. So a little bit different than the pandas syntax here. And I'm going to set this again to what I had before. Width equals 0.9. And I want this to be on my fake data. Oh, excuse me. I'm actually not going to call this on the axes yet. I'm going to call this right on the fake data. So very similar to pandas right now, because I'm calling this on my actual data frame column. Excuse me. Okay. So we've got the width. Now, what do we do about the color? Let me bring down the 538 example here. Did I not run that cell? I didn't. Okay. So here's the 538 example that we want to recreate. All right. Now, if I look at the example that we made, well, first off, we need to set our color. All right. I look at these two colors and I say to myself, those are not the same color. Right. So we're going to get really specific. Now, the way I'm going to get specific is I've got this little color picker extension on my Google Chrome. I'm going to look up exactly the right color here. All right. I'm going to copy that. There's 1,000,001 color picker extensions on Chrome. So if you think that's cool, just go to their extension store in Google Color Picker, and I can set this color very specifically. So this is what's called a hexadecimal color value. In order to indicate to Matplotlib that I want this, I need to set it with a pound sign in the front, a hashtag in the front, in order to tell it this is a hexadecimal color value specifically. Okay, now we've got the same, exactly the same pixel color as the 538 graph. All right, so we're getting closer. We're getting closer, right? So we've got our plotting done. What do you want to do next? I'm taking requests. What should we do next to our graph? Okay, Amin says the title. All right, we'll do the title and we'll do the subtitle. All right, so we're gonna do plot the bars, title. Now, remember, we're doing this on our axes, so this is a little bit confusing because the title and the axis labels, they kind of float off over the figure, but they're still part of the axes. They're not within that exact rectangle, but they're still associated with that rectangle, so they're still on the axes object. All right, so I'm gonna, instead of doing ax.title like I would do with pyplot syntax, I'm gonna do set title, all right? And then I'm gonna tell it what title I want. Now, notice this title has single quotes in it. So because of that, I'm gonna specifically not use single quotes to hold my string value here. And I'm gonna say, oh boy. An inconvenient SQL, truth to power. Cover that in single quotes, is divisive. All right. So by using double quotes on the outside of my string, this is going to allow the single quotes to show as part of the string itself. Right. Looks great, right? All right, so we got the text, but it's white. That's kind of problematic. All right. So we're gonna need to do a couple different things. All right. First off, I don't think this should be white, so that's kind of confusing me. Yeah, Jesus says my text is black, so I'm a little bit confused. No, that's okay, we can fix it. All right, so here's the first thing I want you to know about Matplotlib. It is an object-oriented library. What does that mean? That means that there's different kinds of things we can put on the graph. And some of those things inherit their functionality from other things. So let me say, the title is a good way to demonstrate this. Like the title is inherits from the text object, right? So the title is a customized version of a text object, right? So as I am Googling around this afternoon, doing my assignment, and I'm saying matplotlib set title. Okay, here's the set title function. What are the other parameters I could pass to the set title function to customize how my title looks? Okay, well, so I have LOC for location. I could set that to left. Okay, let's try that. So it's now aligned with the left side of my left spine here. All right, but you might ask yourself, well, how can I change the color? You get here and you look at this and say, there's no way to change the color here. Maybe I can give this a font dict. That looks complicated. It is, by the way. Maybe avoid font dicts for today. But here's what I want you to know. A title object in Matplotlib, under its hood, is also a text object, right? So take a look down here at this section of the documentation. ** quargs, or keyword arguments. What this section means is that there's actually extra parameters that we could pass to this method that are not listed here. And the reason why they're not listed here is because they're not part of the title object. They're part of the underlying text object. All right. So as you're Googling a specific method, trying to figure out, okay, what are the parameters here that I can actually use to do something with, you might not see the parameters that you would hope to. And with Matplotlib, a big reason for that is because they are actually listed under some underlying piece of functionality, right? So if I click text there, here's all of the parameters that I could actually pass to this title method. Okay, probably a lot that you didn't think about. So color or C, right? So let's try that. C equals black, or I don't know what it wants. B. Try hexadecimal value. Oh, I need a comma. I'm missing the comma. That's what's wrong. Okay. Now I fixed the text more or less, right? So it's aligned left now, which is good. That matches here. It might even be a little bit further left than ours is. Maybe we'll customize that in a minute, right? But what else is different about our titles? Well, the font size is different. Coming to my text, font size. Cool, I can use that parameter. But notice I'm looking here at the text object and not the title object, because what a title is just a really custom text object. Well, it's actually not that custom either. It's slightly more custom in that they put it in the center of the graph and made it a little bit bigger. That's all. The only real difference between a title object and a text object. So, oh, when you use the dark grid style, it changed the title text to white. Huh. That's good to know. So I guess be careful what style sheets you try out. I don't know. It shouldn't really matter because you should be able to customize it the way that you like. Right. So font size, what should we try? We'll just play with some different numbers. There's 15. What does that look like? It still looks a little big. It's maybe in the ballpark. All right. Does it seem weird to anyone that I'm passing a number as a string? I think that's kind of weird. All right. Here's something to know about Matplotlib is that when it takes numbers, it will usually take them either as a number or as a string. It will do both. All right. So if it gets a string that's a number, it's going to try and convert it to an integer and then use it. So this is a very weird thing, in my opinion, that a library would try and, of all the things to try and help me out with, that it would accept strings of numbers as numbers. Right. We also want a font weight. All right, let's make this bold if we can. So looking at our font properties, font weight. All right, so I can give it a number between 0 and 1,000, or I can give it one of these specific strings. Let's just try bold for now. Just give it the string of bold. Okay. That's looking better. Not perfect, but it's looking better. Okay, so the last thing I want to fix with this title is that it's a little bit too far to the right. Notice that this starts kind of off where the Y label starts. So we want to go over another centimeter, right? So I can do that by setting specifically the position of it using the X and Y parameters. All right. So for kicks and giggles, we'll just set these both to 1, and we're just going to see where this goes. Okay, all the way over there. That seems like about the height that we want. So I think the X position is probably in the ballpark, but the Y position needs to change a lot. 0.5. Oh, excuse me. The Y position is good. The X position is not. Okay. So as I set this to 1.5, what do you think these numbers here are referring to? Can you decipher it based on the position of the text object? Okay, Joshua says, so maybe the margins or the percentage width of the figure, right? So Cooper asks, is top left 0, 0? Well, I don't know. Let's try it. Well, I do know actually, but so bottom left is 0, 0. A lot of graphic design things have top left be 0, 0. That is not the case with Matplotlib. So I want this to be 0, 1 maybe. And now it's at the top. So this is where it was before, right? Notice if I remove these, no change. All right, so same with lock left is the same thing, oops, as x equals 0, y equals 1. Need comma. All right. Oh, it changed it actually slightly. And don't forget your commas, friends. All right, so I actually want this a little bit further to the left. So if I say negative 0.2, that's maybe a little bit too much left. Negative 0.1, negative 0.07. Oddly specific, right? And so a lot of work with matplotlib is going to be this fiddling with numbers until it looks the way you want. But I need a subtitle, right? And I don't have one of those yet. Actually, I'm gonna make my font weight 13. Aha. The font style itself is a little bit different. I'm gonna push this up a little bit higher to make room for a subtitle, right? And then we're gonna set a subtitle. There are multiple ways to do this, but I'm going to just straight up use a text object. So this text object is what underlies all the text on the screen. So when I use an X label, a Y label, a title, a tick label, under the hood, they're all text objects, but they've been positioned or given a specific font, or these styles are set specifically for the different specific text objects, right? So again, I'm going to give this some text, which is IMDb, lowercase b, ratings for the film as of August 29th of who knows what year, a few years ago. All right. So missing positional argument, missing required argument y. So my text object won't go on the screen unless I tell it where to go. Missing values for argument x. I think what might be going on here is I need to say that this is the string argument. Yeah, so all right. You'll notice that as I write my matplotlib code, the last thing that I'm working on, that's what this echo at the top refers to. All right, so when I did just the plot, this thing at the top referred to the axes that were being put on the page. When I do just the title, this thing at the top refers to the title. It says, oh, this title is just a text object. All right. When I do the subtitle, well, I'm explicitly using a text object in this case. But here it is down here in white. So we still have some customization to do here. Let's do color equals black. Now I can at least see it. And let's get this position right. Let's try y equals 5. Y equals 50. Okay, that's better. Maybe a little high. Y equals 46. Okay, so notice here my x and y objects referred to the size of the axes itself when I did set title. Here, my text object, what do you think my text object here, what do you think these x and y numbers refer to here? Are they pixel values? They might be pixel values. What I really think they are is I think they are the height of the text object. The height of the text object. So kind of confusing. Get this over where I want it. -1. -1.5. minus 1.45. All right. I got a subtitle on. Is it exactly like IMDb? No, not quite yet. Maybe I want the font size to be a little smaller. That's a little too small. Okay. We're getting closer. We're getting closer. All right, so what should we set next? By the way, I'm going way over the 80 character limit here. Numbers, you want to get our axes labels here? Okay, I'm gonna do the axes labels and then we'll do the tick labels, right? The numbers that are going on here. So first off, let's do our X label and then we'll do our Y label. So ax.set X label. Remember, we have set that gets added on to everything here. And what I want that label to be, rating, color equals black. Okay, it's an improvement. And let's try the Y label. But this will be, what do you think the method will be here? Set Y label. And I don't want this string here to be rating. I want it to be percent of total votes with the first P capitalized. All right, it's an improvement. We might want to fiddle with the font size here. Yeah, that's probably in the ballpark. I'll let you customize it further. And we might want these more bold, right? So still not amazing, but it's closer. It's closer, in my opinion. You can try and make this as pixel perfect as possible on your assignment. Okay, so now we need the maybe these y-axis and x-axis tick labels, major tick labels. All right, because first off, they are they're white. We need them to make them black. All right, so let's set our x-axis tick labels. All right, what? Give me some help here. Help me Google and figure out what the method should be that I should use here. Tell me what would you Google? Matplotlib, probably. Start with that. Then what? What would you Google to try and figure out what this method should be? Set tick labels. All right, guys, spell labels right. Okay. So we have pyplot.xticks. Do you think that's going to work for me? Pyplot.xticks. Okay, the next Google result was the correct one. Yeah, that's true. All right, so this is not going to be what I want because I'm not using pyplot syntax. All right, I'm not using pyplot syntax. So I need to ignore this result and I need to look at set xtick labels, which is the figure axes syntax version. Right? So this is good. And sometimes they even have little code examples down here at the bottom. In this case, they don't. And this says, hey, there's additional keyword arguments here. This is, yet again, a text object. So if you don't see what you need here, go check out the text object properties. There's a lot of additional customizations you can make. All right, so ax.set xtick labels. All right. Now, what does this need? It needs some labels, a list or a string of labels. All right, so let's give it that. what do we want our X tick labels to be? Well, we want them to be the numbers 1 through 10. So I can literally type these out. And those will be my labels. It's the same as they already are. I want to set the color again, so you can actually see what's going on here. All right. What else is wrong with these labels? Yeah, orientation. So kind of messed up. So you might be like, okay, I'm using the X-tick labels method. Let me come here and see what I can do with the X-tick labels method. There isn't jack squat here that talks about rotation or orientation or anything like that. All right. But the text properties, yet again, they're going to bail us out here. So where is this at? Rotation, angle in degrees. That might work for us. Oh, or I could say vertical or horizontal. Okay, so let's say rotation equals horizontal. Hey, there we go. All right. Actually, these tick labels are not black. They're kind of like a gray. Yeah, maybe. You can try and get the exact pixel color on your assignment. And maybe the font size is too big. Okay. Let's do the same thing with our Y-tick labels. What do you think the function is going to be? ax.set Y-tick labels. Right. So I hope you're seeing that Matplotlib is not too bad, at least for the basic things we need to do. Basically, we have our graph, and then everything else is a text object. Right? Our tick labels are text. Our X and Y axis labels, they're text. Our titles and subtitles, they're all text. All right, so we're going to knock out the text objects here, and then we're going to do a couple of things that are not text related. All right. So what do I want my labels to be here? Well, I want them to be 0, 10, 20, 30, 40. All right. Or maybe I want these to be, this 40 has like a little percent sign after it. So maybe instead of passing numbers, I'll pass strings. So I can add the percent sign at the end of the 40. And let's make it black again, or gray, so we can see it. Okay. What do you think? Are we done with the Y-tick labels? Okay, the range is messed up. Yeah, this is a lot like styling websites. We're literally controlling the styles of our graph here, right? Lots of fiddling, looking up syntax. All right, so here's what I'm going to tell you is that we just set the Y-tick labels, but if we want to control where these labels go, we need to set the Y-ticks themselves, right? So you'll notice that on this 538 graph, we have one tick and one grid line for each label. So they go by tens. But here we have them going by fives, right? And so it's just assigned each one of these tick labels to a tick starting from the bottom. So if I set those X ticks, excuse me, Y tick, just Y ticks, AX dot set Y ticks, and I can do that same way as I did before. 0, 10, 20, 30, 40. Better, right? Now that also changed the grid lines, which is nice. Now with this top line's getting a little bit cut off, I'll let you fiddle with that and try and make it better. But at this point, I think we are fairly close, at least to the bulk of what's going on here, right? There's one thing I want to teach you though, right? There may be cases where typing out all these individual labels gets a little bit tedious. All right. Oh, I messed up the range. 0, 10, 20, 30, 40. 0, 10, 20, 30, 40. 1 through 10. I think it looks good, doesn't it? All right. If we write out these text labels this way. Oh, gotcha. I was just late to your comment, Jonathan. Sorry about that. Then this is a lot of typing. All right. I want to talk about, and I'll go to another code cell down here. This is called the range object. This is actually a Python specific thing. All right, we're going to talk about the range function with Python. All right. What does the range function do? It increments for us. It gives us a range of values. So say, go from 0 to 50 and count by ones. All right. And you may have used something like this in a for loop before, right? So now I can, for item in this range, print item. Right? I get 0 to 49. Why? Because it starts with the first index, and that is included, but the second index is not included. Right? So very much like list slicing syntax, inclusive and exclusive. Right? So if I wanted to go up to 50, I would actually need to go 1 to 51. And this will give me the counting numbers from 1 to 50. All right. So this is the range function. Very useful for for loops, but also useful for just getting a list of numbers. So one thing I can do is I can make a specific range. They go from 1 to 10 and count by ones, and then I can cast it to the list just to see the actual values of that range. Notice it went up to but did not include 10. Right, so I want 10 to be here. I have to actually go to 11. Turn it up to 11. Right, so notice this list here is the same as this list here. Right? So the cool thing about this is I can just take this range object and I can replace these labels with that range object, and it'll give me the same thing. Okay. What if I wanted to count by tens? Say I wanted to go from 0 to 50 and count by tens. So the third object is how many to count by. Then what do I get? I get 0 to 40. Right? What if I took this range and replaced these labels with that range? Cool. I get the numbers. I lose my percent sign here, so maybe I wouldn't want to do that. But this can be a simple way of setting tick marks at even increments, is to use this range object. So I just want to introduce that to you in case you're not already familiar with it. I'm actually going to put these labels back so that we can keep the percent sign here. But I'm going to reset these ticks using this range function. Oops, I don't need the whole list. Oops, wrong one. This one. All right. So that could be a fun way of getting evenly incremented numbers. The last thing I want to work with you on is we have a gray background right now, and I want to get a white background. Right? And then we'll call this a wrap for our lecture today. All right. So this is a little bit different. You notice I did this before. You might have to Google this, and we'll learn more about what the patch object means. So I need figure set figure background color. Figure.patch.set. So this is saying for this whole patch, for this whole figure, set some property on it. Then what am I going to set? I'm going to set the face color to be white. Figure has no attribute path patch. So now I've got a white figure. Right? I believe there might even also be figure.set base color equals. Right? Same thing. This is the hard thing about matplotlib. There's multiple ways of doing things. So when you're Googling, it might be a little bit tricky. Oh, currently it's transparent. That makes a little bit of sense. Oh, you're saying the IMDb one is transparent. Gotcha. Yeah, there are ways to make this transparent and export it. But we're not going to worry about that today. You can try that as you're working on your assignment. It's a hair tricky, but not too hard. Okay, so Willie says I'm getting a weird error. So what I think is going on there, Willie, is that your labels need to be as a list, and right now you just have them as individual strings, comp rings. So you just need your square brackets around those values for your labels. Yep. See if that helps. All right, and then let's set the axes background color. We'll do ax. Oh, sorry. Yeah, because this is on the axes. Dot set base color equals white. All right. Or ax dot set, and then after I type set, if you've opted into the Google Colab new features, you can see all of the options here. I can set the face color equals white. Should do the same thing. All right. And this is where I leave you. All right. We're going to wrap things up here. Now, the first part of your assignment is to take this graph and make it as close to this graph as possible. All right. You'll notice that will require you to do things that I haven't demonstrated yet. I haven't given you code syntax for taking this further. You're gonna have to practice Googling, practice looking through the matplotlib syntax. Amin says, there has to be a quicker way to create an explanatory visualization. Please say yes. There is. It's called the Seaborn library. What the Seaborn library is a bunch of pre-written matplotlib graphs. So these are matplotlib graphs that have the customizations already done for you and can be a better starting place. However, if you have a Seaborn graph and you want to customize it, you're still going to have to fall back to the matplotlib syntax. All right. So this is why we're teaching matplotlib first. Seaborn, in my opinion, is a bit more powerful and looks better in general. But if you ever want to go beyond the default behavior of Seaborn, you're going to have to use matplotlib anyway. So we're trying to not take the shortcut. Make sure you teach matplotlib first. After that, Seaborn will be fairly straightforward. All right. Slido questions here in a minute. Cooper says, should we copy the progress you've made already? Yes, please do. Type it out, learn these parameters. Basically, we've just set a lot of text objects, and then we did some things with the axes labels. Oh, I want to make this 11. Goodness me. All right. All right, let me check Slido, and then I'll give you just 2 more words of counsel about your assignment. Oh no, did I delete the Slido? Did I close the tab? One moment. Oh, the Slido link got pinned. I can find it quickly that way. Aha. All right, sorry about that. Okay. Oh, thank you for the throat recipe. I appreciate that. Is the figure a fixed value relative to the objects inside? don't know. I'm not sure what you mean by a fixed value. So think about matplotlib as if it's like different layers. So like there's the figure layer behind everything. And then there's the axes layer on top of that. Then there's the plot, the actual bars on top of that, right? Kind of in that order. Not 100% sure if that gets at your question. How do I create parallel graphs? When I use figure axes equals subplots 1, 2, the ax command returns errors. Okay, so we'll talk about that a little bit more later, but we can make multiple subplots by passing in parameters here to the subplots, but that will give us multiple axes objects and multiple figure objects. So I might have like axes 1, axes 2, axes 3. I would Google a tutorial of somebody explaining how to use matplotlib subplots if you want to put multiple graphs on the same figure. Right? So we're just starting off simple. We're starting off with one graph on one figure for today. The range function works only for integers, doesn't it? That's a good question. What if I wanted to count by 0.25? Yeah, it looks to me like it does. I typically only use it for integers, so maybe that's why, because I can't use it for anything else. Okay, wait, what's the third number in the range? The third number is how many to count by. So this is saying go from 0 to 50 and count by 10s. Go from 1 to 11 and count by 1s, right? So if I wanted to go from 1 to 11 but count by 2s, float object still giving me an error because of this guy, right? So now I'm getting just the odd numbers from 1 to 9. So the third value, how many to count by. All right. Is there a place where you can download your lecture notes? Yes, absolutely. What I would do is take these links, right? Oh, Jacob beat me to it. And save a copy after lecture's over to your Google Drive. And then over time, you're gonna have a lot of Google Drive notebooks, right? You got your own assignment notebooks, you got lecture notebooks, you can have sprint challenge notebooks, you're gonna have a lot of stuff. Start building a folder structure so you can keep things organized. It may be the case that in a month from now, you're building a matplotlib graph and you're like, crap, how do I do the range thing with the tick labels, right? And you're gonna wanna access your work from today. And it's gonna be really helpful if you just have it in a folder structure to go find it in your Google Drive rather than like scrolling up through Slack for a billion years till you find the right link, right? So start organizing your Google Drives would be my suggestion. The last thing I'm gonna talk about is you will be, for the second half of your assignment, you get to pick a graph to recreate, right? And I just want to help you see, here's all the different data sets that 538 makes public that they use for building their graphs, right? They're all listed here, which is pretty cool. As you are looking for something to make, please do not try and make one of these tables. These tables are a lot more complicated than you think. Try and go easy on yourself for the second half of lecture. And then as a stretch goal, go wild. You can pick whatever you want for the stretch goal, but please do not try and make anything that's like these tables for your assignment. Try and pick something that's fairly straightforward. Pick something like a line plot, a scatter plot, a histogram. I don't even know where one of those would be. You'll have to look through a few of these to find something you want. Media frenzy around Biden is failing. That would be an interesting one because it's a line plot. You could try and do, I thought this was going to have a map on it. Just lots of tables. Yeah, don't do the tables. Find something that is not a table to try and recreate. Are you the best warlord? Of course I am. A line plot, number of Thanoses. That would be a pretty easy one to recreate. This doesn't look very explanatory. It looks like not very 530-80 anyway. So just look through these and try and find one. This would not be a very easy one to make. I actually don't even think this is made with matplotlib. So try and go easy on yourself for the lecture and then challenge yourself on the sprint challenge. That's all I'm really gonna say. Yeah, I might have to look through a few of these before you find one that really tickles your fancy, you think it would be interesting to work on. but it'll be probably a little more challenging than you think it will. So don't be overly ambitious with your assignment. All right. So thanks, everybody. I hope you feel like you can do some basic things with Matplotlib. You can put text objects on. You can put data on. You can customize colors, fonts, positions of things, tick labels, colors of the bars, all these different things. That'll get you a lot further than you might think with Matplotlib. I hope you're excited to add this new library to your tool belt. So thanks, everybody. We'll have a Q&A this afternoon as well. So I'll announce more about that in the channel after we break here. So thanks, everybody. I'll see you a little bit later this afternoon.